Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello everyone and welcome Carl and welcome to our audience to Points of View. It's another Sunday morning. So just to start, a word from our sponsors. So Kialo, BET award-winning Kialo Edu is the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussions. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. And John Catt, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers of professional development, books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles using the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Welcome, Carl. So our first topic today, there's numerous news articles reporting on this. I think it started with an article in the Telegraph, but our headline is ex-Ofsted boss. So we're talking about Amanda Spielman, of course, if you're unsure, says education secretary wants to please unions. And this is the ongoing argument about the new schools bill, the Children Wellbeing in Schools bill, to give it its full title, the changes there, and Spielman coming out against it, and then quite a vehement response from the education department towards Spielman, which she says sounds like it was written by the education unions. I'll start. So it's you and me just for the moment. Carl, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it sounds like Amanda Spielman has been spending too much time in the company of the last government, whose approach was obviously not particularly successful when it comes to school inspections. I think she's trying to repair her legacy, Dave. Truth is, the last framework was a disaster. Ofsted has gone through an existential crisis. She has left under a cloud because the whole Ruth Perry debacle was, so awful. Everybody's heart goes out to Ruth Perry's family and to her sister. Hello, Tajinder.
Hi.
And I think it's fair to say that it exposed what had been for a long time known to school leaders that the system was wholly dysfunctional and was causing way more harm than good. She's trying to defend herself by saying, oh, well, the changes are actually not needed, and actually what's going to happen is it'll make things worse. Well, if I was looking for opinions on how to reform Ofsted and make it better than it has been, the last person that I would go for information and advice would be Amanda Spielman, who I think...
That's really unfair. It's really genuinely unfair because you're launching an ad hom on her, and that's just wrong. Look, for a start, yes, the Ruth Perry thing was utterly awful. It's utterly awful that any leader would find themselves in that position. However, you know as well as everybody else that the Samaritans themselves say that you cannot pin it on one reason and one reason alone. They say it explicitly. So for you to do it again is to go against every single bit of advice that we know that we should take care of when we speak about anything related to suicide. Sorry, not having it. Secondly, Amanda Spielman did not do just bad things. She did an awful lot of good as well. And the fact of the matter is, yes, that is a shame that marred the end of her term, but it doesn't mean that she never gets to have a say on anything anymore. That's not how this works. other Ofsted chief inspectors did much worse things, like, for example, previous ones who said things like, oh, we should just sit around making lessons more fun for the children. That was much more harmful than anything in
Who said that, Tarjinder?
There was a previous one who did, trust me.
What, Michael Wilshaw?
Sorry?
I was going to say, Tadji, that doesn't sound like anything Michael Wilshaw would say. I'd have to go back and check.
Who was the second Ofsted? It was a female one. Who was the second one? It was definitely one of them.
Okay. I don't know.
Going back to the 2000s, and I think that quote, I would need to verify that because I think I've heard it before, but I think that's been regularly debunked, Tajinda. I think we need to check.
I think it became that
well, since we don't know who it is, and since we don't know the provenance of it, I think we need to be careful.
You're saying that Amanda Spielman now doesn't get to have a say. Again, you're rewriting history here, Carl. You're rewriting it because you're saying that nothing she did was good and that she has no right to say anything. Yes, she does.
Okay, I mean,
I heard someone talk about Ofsted. There was like a thing like coming in. Like I ran in, I turned the camera on, I got a microphone on. I was like, I've got to get involved in this conversation. Come on now.
Sorry, Tom. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that so the way I look at it is this, right? The coroner at the what would you call it, inquiry or whatever you want to call it, into the death of Ruth Perry, they basically concluded that the Ofsted inspection, the Ofsted system contributed to a great part to her death. That's what they concluded at that inquest. Now, for me, after that point, I think that the way things went after that point with regards to Amanda Spielman, I don't think she showed any contrition, any real contrition after that point. And I also think that now she's obviously left as chief inspector, Martin Oliver's come in. And I just feel like it just feels sort of arrogant to come out and start telling Bridget Phillipson how to do her job properly, or how unions are sort of directing what she does and everything else, when it didn't feel like Amanda Spielman was listening. I mean, Julia Waters was coming out with doing all these interviews at the time, and I was watching it going, why don't you just sort of talk to her like human to human? And I just felt like a lot of it, she was in her own world. And so now I just, there's something for me that I don't agree with about sort of attacking. It's not whether I agree or disagree with Bridget Phillipson. It's not even that. It's the fact of like, who are you to say that? Like, do you understand? Like, the thing is, I look at it and I go, you failed as a chief inspector. That's my opinion. That's how you failed as I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, Tarjin. Yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh, she failed completely. No one's ever failed completely. That's not what's happened, right? There are things you may have liked, things that you may have disliked. And Tom, you dislike Ofsted. You dislike the whole thing. I agree with that. And I'm not here to defend Amanda, like, no matter what. So I think there are things that she could have done differently and better. And the fact of the matter is everyone can. But the idea that she's no longer allowed to have an opinion is ridiculous. Secondly, Bridget Phillipson does need to be told how to do her job, given that she doesn't seem to know what to do. I mean, look, it's an open secret. The unions are running the show, right? Behind the scenes.
No, that's not true at all.
It's an open secret, Carl. Everybody knows it. Everyone can literally name the unions who are writing the business.
As a member of...
She can't talk about it because she doesn't know her own bill. She doesn't know her own bill.
Can I answer that point?
And then she says to do ad homs on people. Like, this is literally how this
I'm going to answer that point, Tarjinder, if I may, for a moment.
It's open, like I said, it's openly people talk about it.
All right. I'm going to answer that point,
I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I still know this is
I'm going to answer it whether you let me or not, because I think I need to. First of all, as a member of one of the most prominent school teacher unions, leader unions, and a former member of the council, I can say most wholeheartedly, and I know from the inside, that the idea that the education secretary takes her notes from that particular union and what they say is about as far away from the truth as it's possible to be. If it only was, then I think we'd be in a better state, but that's not the case. Secondly, to say that it's an open secret and then to talk about a highly subjective interpretation, I think is well, shall we say, mischievous? I would argue. Number one, there isn't a secret there. There's no evidence to support that at all. Number two, whatever you might think about Bridget Phillipson, to say that she's in the pay of the unions or somehow in the direction of the unions is just absurd, because apart from anything else, Tajinder, I'm sure you'll be aware of the reaction to the unions to the proposals by Ofsted, and I know it's not directly from Bridget Phillipson, but the proposals by Ofsted to reform the inspection.
But it's not direct from Bridget
and
Phillipson.
then the reaction of the union. If I can just finish,
Been allowed to let the unions write it.
If I can just finish, the reaction of the unions to the reaction of the unions to the suggestions for reforming Ofsted and the accountability measures has been about as hostile as it possibly could be. So it would be stretching the point. If I can just finish the final part, Tajinder, I'm very happy for you to then jump in. But I was just going to say, so the idea that an education secretary were trying to appease the teacher unions by doing something that they are diametrically opposed to, I think is would be something of a surprise both to the unions and to Bridget Phillipson.
Right. Well, the fact of the matter is that Bridget Phillipson has not been involved in the Ofsted reforms themselves, not personally, not straight up, right? So therefore, she can't, well, for one, she can't hand it over to them. And secondly, actually, she may very well still not be happy with it precisely because the unions aren't happy with it. So she's still taking that route. She's still taking that line. Now, in terms of the actual proposed changes to Ofsted, well, I mean, what do you hope for here? I mean, it's got to come from somewhere. And if it comes from the DFE, it's just going to be a mess anyway. Makes no difference.
Sorry, I was just going to get back to Tom's point. I think it's interesting because Spielman hasn't actually made, if you look at the detail of it, she hasn't really made a comment on Ofsted. She's talking about the curriculum, well, really the changes to the multi-academy trusts. That's her big thing. Yeah. Ofsted is, I think, is a separate beast. And yes, there's been a lot of criticism of that, from, well, but not just the unions, from principals. It seems to be that the changes they've made just aren't cutting it. But I guess getting back to what you were saying, Tom, are you saying that Spielman just has no right to comment on anything? Even if it's not Ofsted, she's sort of done her dash, even if it's talking about
everyone has a right to comment on everything. Anybody, come on, free speech. Anyone can comment on anything. No one should be saying you're not allowed to speak because of XYZ. You've got to literally be silent. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm just commenting on her comments. I'm just saying that I disagree personally. So if it for me, it was on her watch what happened. I don't really, care whether she thinks it was anything to do with her and whether she thinks that, whatever, she disagrees with what the inquest said and all the rest of it. It was on her watch what happened. It was, and it did happen. And therefore, this is more a personal point of view rather than anything else, because everyone else is entitled to what they think. For me, I just think I don't see much contrition in this whole thing of attacking Bridget Phillipson. I didn't see, politicians didn't attack Amanda Spielman when she did those interviews after it all happened. All the podcast interviews she did. She went on BBC with Laura Koonsberg. She went on this. She went on that. She didn't show any contrition. I didn't see sort of anybody from the political elites attacking her and laying into her. They were all silent. I didn't like that. I thought they should have, but they didn't. But now she's I don't know. It just
No, far
frustrates
from
me.
it, Tom. I think you're absolutely right, if I may say. I mean, in fact, what happened in the immediate aftermath was she doubled down on the fact that the approach of the inspectors was correct. And it was only in the inquest and in the verdict that the judge gave that it then became clear that that doubling down was, certainly in the view of the judge, to be a little bit tone deaf. And since then, she hasn't shown any contrition, and she has been quite outspoken in her defense of the previous system. And she does have a right to a view, like everybody does. I never suggested she doesn't. And neither am I giving a personal ad hominem attack on her as an individual in terms of her characteristics. I'm saying that what she was justifying, and the fact that, as Tom said, she was overseeing Ofsted at a time when an awful thing happened, and a lot has changed since then, and has had to change since then. She needs to be, I would argue, a little bit more humble, a little bit more accepting that things were done badly, a little bit more accepting that the situation that we now have should be done in a different way. But also, if I may add, Dave's point is fair, that she was actually talking about not the Ofsted framework in itself, but the bill and the academy freedoms. And,
but the only reason that is the case is because she said she wants to let Martin Oliver get on with the job, and she doesn't want to make difficulties for him. There's not actually any other reason she's not talking about Ofsted. She'd love to pile in and say the changes are crap, and I was better than Martin. I'm sure. I'm being a bit.
Every single person who does a role like that is going to say the exact same thing. Like education secretary, whatever, right? They're all going to say the exact same thing. So for a start, she's just doing what people do. So let's not go there. Secondly, the coroner could still only say that it was part of what contributed to the suicide, not the entire thing. And it is still absolutely sad. But I don't know how much contrition you want from an individual who wasn't personally involved in the actual inspection itself and who had run that system. And it's not like we were having a suicidal week here, people, right? It was one. And it's really awful. It's really sad. And your heart does go out to it. And yes, we did have to consider it, but we're not talking about somebody who this happened to repeatedly. So actually, I don't really know how you're supposed to react in that situation. You may not have liked Amanda's reaction, but equally, I don't think that whether she'd been contrite or not, anybody would have changed their mind on what they were actually saying in terms of whether they liked Ofsted or disliked Ofsted. Right? They would still gone down the same route.
It doesn't feel like it's sunk in, though. It doesn't feel like it's sunk in. That's just my personal perception.
Happened, Tom. But Tom, it was a really unusual thing to have happened. Come on, let's be
that unusual, Tarjinder. If I can,
I think there's 13 deaths.
Tarjinder, that it wasn't unusual at all. As a local representative of a school leader union, I can tell you that many school leaders are in a very dark place as a result of Ofsted inspections, which for all sorts of reasons they feel were inappropriately conducted. Over the last few years, particularly over the period that Amanda Spielman was the head of Ofsted, many members were. Tom cites, and it's on, we don't know for sure, but there is a suggestion of 13 suicides. And I know that there are many others that contemplated it and got into a dark place. So to say it's only one or it was very rare, simply, Tarjinder, is not supported by the evidence base.
That are out there, are they? They're not statistics that are out there.
They sort of are, because I'm going to give myself a bit of a plug. You go to the person I interviewed who did his PhD on the history of Ofsted, but that doesn't go up to Spielman, so it has a long tail, and we can't just. So you are right in a sense, just to focus on her. I guess just getting back to it, I've sort of got just two ideas that came up. One is, again, it's a really hard thing because she's talking about multi-academy trust. So is, her expertise there, is it warranted? Like what happened before? How much should it be sort of held against her? Like what's her public voice? The second one is, I do have problems. I guess I'm sort of agreeing with Tarjinder here. I had problems with the briefing against her by the education department. I thought that was too extreme, but I find that I just don't like that type of sort of language in the public debate anyway. But I do also sort of, I'm going to hedge my bets here, sort of agree with Carl. It's an easy thing for Spielman to go, oh, well, that's just union talk. I thought both sides, that's weak. Like, one, I didn't like what the education, the briefing against her, or she should spend more time thinking about her failures. But two, just it's so easy to just go, oh, well, that's what the unions would say. She's talking to the unions. That's a union language. I'm like, come on.
The point is, the DFE is the government arm, right? At the end of the day, they need to stop whoever this 12-year-old is that they're getting to send out like messages like that, because it's not the first time it's happened. There's multiple times. What the teenager is they've hired to write their messages needs to stop. Right? Go get a proper grown-up, get somebody who's lived for, like, I don't know, 20, 30 years, and get them to write it, because clearly they've got someone wrong. Like, someone...
Well, I agree. I agreed with them.
Yeah,
and
I
I
agree
think
on that.
the response was wholly reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't know how old they were.
It's too easy for Spielman, getting back to her sort of original question, just to go, oh, well, they would say that because they spend too much time with the unions. I also think
fair enough. Even that's lazy. I'm not going to like disagree. Like, it's I agree, it's an easy line to take, and I'm not going to say that it's not, but equally she's entitled to it, and if it's true, then it's true.
The other thing that may I add, though, is the assumption there, presumption there, is that that's a bad thing. That actually listening to the people that work in the profession is a bad thing. That they should be treated as the enemy is the implication of what you're saying. No, I think there's been way too much of that for way too long. While nobody wants any one professional body on its own to make education policy, talking to the people who work in the profession, talking to the people with the experience and, dare I say, expertise in the profession is, I would say, an entirely reasonable thing to do.
Yeah,
just
no,
in the same way, if I can just finish again, Tajinder, if I may, in an entirely reasonable way that you would, for example, if you were reforming the health service, talk to the medical associations, the BMI, for example. These people know and understand the practice that they're working in. And while you don't have to accept everything they say, it would be a great shame if, as has happened over the last 15 years, you ignored or even positively went in the opposite direction to what they say. And the result of that is that you get lots of people that leave the profession. And that's not good for young people. That's not good for the country.
But okay, but the fact of the matter is that it's not like people have been completely ignored. I don't believe that the profession has been completely ignored before. I don't agree with that. I think there were sections of it that may have had more say than others, but I don't think there was just nothing there at all. Secondly, it would involve the actual unions actually representing their members and talking on behalf of them, and not just talking on behalf of their own political views. And I say that about, like, well, I can think of particular unions that do take a political line that doesn't even match what their own members think, right? So the point is, are they actually telling the truth on that?
First of all, they're democratic organizations, Tajinder. The leaders of them are elected by the members. They can remove them. That's how democracy works. They're not
democracy in a union is not the same thing. Come on, most members are just too tired, got too much on their plate to ever even vote and elect whoever it is.
Well,
I mean,
that's like,
how many people actually voted for him? The other thing is, if Bridget Phillipson
I mean, I don't. If I can just address that point before we go.
No, hang on, Carl. Let Tajinder finish a point.
If she really wants to,
it was just a different point, Tom. That was all.
Yeah, no, it is a different point. I apologise. Look, if she wants to do that, she can visit schools. She can visit like the highest progress schools that there are. She has not done so. She's not interested. She doesn't want to know what the reality is on the ground, not for herself. She wants
to. Can I respond to that?
Sorry?
Can I respond to that now? Yeah, she's been to dozens and dozens of schools. It's just simply not true that she hasn't visited schools. She has been to many, many schools. I think I would be right in saying hardly a week goes by without her visiting at least one, if not several schools. So let's just correct the record on that. She has been to lots of schools. Secondly, one of the great things about Bridget Phillipson and the current cabinet, I may argue, is that nearly all of them, and Bridget Phillipson in particular, attended a state school. And that's
That
the
doesn't make you a
first
better
time.
person. Get real here, Carl. That does not make you a better person.
Hang on a minute, because they only get influence. So just let me finish my point. They only get the Department for Education only really has any influence over the state education system. So up until this point, the majority of Secretary of States of Education have not only never experienced the state education system themselves, or very intermittently at best, but secondly, they don't send their children to it either. So they literally have had ultimate power over a system that they have no vested interest in and no experience of. Now, I welcome the fact that we have an education secretary now who is neither of those things, who uses the system, who was a direct recipient of the system, and therefore has at her heart a direct reason for wanting the system to flourish. And I think that alone is an important reason why it's a big difference.
Carl, your little love fest for Bridget Phillips needs to end on this basis, right? The only reason she's doing the job is so she can go on and be Labour leader.
I think that's too harsh, Ginger. You got
it's not too harsh at all. Like, it's just like, come on, like, you can write this love letter in private. Like, no, sorry, I'm not having this kind of, like, fangirling her. Like, she's so amazing. She went to a state school. Like, so what if you went to a state school? There are plenty of people who went to state schools and done pretty bad things, and it doesn't mean that she's going to be any better. Look, she's just going to run the education system down. Then we're going to have to go back to arguing over how to bring it back up again, because she has no clue what she's doing.
Sorry to jump in, but I do need to go to another ad read, but I do want to comment on Carl. The secretary, like our favourite educational secretary, Gavin Williamson, he went to a state school, he went to a sixth form college. He's one of the only few to go to a state, like at that stage, I think, of the Tories. So, I always look at him and think, on paper, that guy should have been, based on your criteria, an amazing secretary. And I would argue he was not. So I do have slight problems. I don't know about this line about, I don't know if Phillipson wants to be Prime Minister, Tajin. How can any of us know that, really?
Everyone knows it.
Everyone
knows, apart from the other three people in the room.
I just don't know. Okay, next ad read before we maybe we'll move on to something else. Maybe we'll continue on this. So BET award-winning Kialo Edu is the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. And of course, John Catt. The show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR. It's on your screen now for 20% off your order. So, I mean, the next, which is sort of related, I guess, in a sense, the next topic we were thinking about looking at is this week, the first 14 of the proposed changes to the curriculum have come out. These are all, obviously ideas that may come out. The one I'm sort of scanning through them right now, the one that interested me the most, but we can work through any that might interest you guys, is the one about the volume of exams under the spotlight. So another theme response is a volume of assessment undertaken by students at Key Stage 4. Students sit between 24 and 31 hours of exams, which there's only one place in the world that is comparable, and that's Singapore. And previous reforms are talking about previous reforms reduced the use of coursework and had more exams. Now they're thinking about going the other way, not going to reduce GCSEs, but the amount of exams. I'll just put it out there. I think that's not a bad thing. I think it's a weird English obsession that knowledge exams equal excellence, that some sort of recall off the top of your head proves you're somewhat smarter than others. I think you could reduce the amount of exams without dumbing down. And I just don't like how this has been presented, which is immediately less exams means we're dumbing down the curriculum. So your take on it, who wants to start?
Happy to start?
Go on.
Okay, so I agree with you, first of all, Dave. I think it was always the plan of this current government to kick the curriculum can a little bit down the road, to give them a few months to get their feet under the table and figure out what's what. And then I don't think there was any stomach for a big curriculum review. And I don't think there's any stomach in the profession for a big change in the curriculum. I don't think there's any particular great movement for major change in the curriculum. But what I think the report has highlighted, and what I think has gone down pretty well with most people in the profession, is the fact that there are in some subjects at GCSE that are very content heavy. And what that means is that you end up with a greater volume of content than it's feasible for most teachers to get through, while securing mastery of the content. So as a history teacher, I can say that I hardly meet a history teacher elsewhere in the country who wouldn't say that the current GCSE curriculum is way too packed with content. And what it does is it has a counter-productive effect. So I say a student that might actually do okay in history and flourish in history is immediately put off and then becomes disengaged, because they're having to go through at a superficial level and a high rate of knots, a huge amount of content, which almost means that right up to the day of the exam, they're learning new content. And that works if you're a very, very able, highly motivated student. But for the probably 80% of students, that's not really the best way to engage and learn a subject. So I think that particular, so the media talked about the actual volume of exams and the number of hours, and that is a relevant factor. But I think it's also the volume of the content. In a number of subjects, and the fact that sometimes you can end up teaching too much and therefore not doing it particularly well.
And I would say, sorry, Tajin, just to jump in, so I know you've probably got a lot to say, but it's having an effect at A level. I mean, I only teach A level. I think the A level is pretty good, but now you could say about the history numbers going down at A level, there's a variety of things in terms of the humanities courses. But one of the things we're fighting against is just the problems with the GCSE. Students are finding history content heavy, finding it pretty boring, and we're having to fight against that. And I do think it is a factor in the declining numbers. I don't think it's the only factor in the declining numbers of history students at A level, but it is something we're constantly having to mitigate against. It just seems it's a complaint that is just constant. But Tajinder, what are your thoughts? Have you had a look at some of the changes beyond this?
And I think there are changes that I agree with. So, for example, I agree that we should have less content in some of the areas in primary. I do think that there was definitely a mistake made there, because the solution to things not happening in secondary can't be that you just overload primary with content, and particularly because we do understand the importance of knowledge and practice. We've got to give those children a chance to actually practice what they're learning. Okay, like in maths, for example, it's really difficult to give them, I think, the practice they need. I think there's definitely flexibilities there. There's also things that we could definitely do in terms of the transition between Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 3. Key Stage 2, never mind Key Stage 3. The leap from year 1 to year 2 is ridiculous. From writing sentences, you've got to go to writing text, whole text. I mean, that just makes no sense to me that there's no paragraph level. So hopefully there'll be some sensible suggestions there. In terms of the exams, personally, I don't teach. I've never taught GCSEs and A level, so I don't know the impact of that. But my instinct is a little bit that because there's a tendency for Labour governments and those people who support them to dumb down standards, to reduce standards, I would worry. Yes, there is, Carl. Absolutely. That's why every
we're not going to
disagree on this.
There's absolutely no evidence to support that. But anyway, carry on.
It's just not true. Because there is that tendency to want to dumb things down and to want to reduce standards so we can make everybody equitable, as though you can make everybody equitable by those means. It just doesn't happen, right? So I would be skeptical of this, but I don't think that the actual issue here is this interim review, because I think they've still been relatively sensible. What's worrying me is what they're actually going to put in the curriculum. And what is the content actually going to be? What's it? Because I don't think they're going to hold back from politicizing it full on.
Well, I would say every government politicizes the curriculum to some extent. Everything is a political view. You know, the EBAC, whether you argue for it or against it, is an idea that favors
in terms of content. I mean, actually being forced to teach things like critical race theory. This is my concern, right?
Well, I'm not aware anybody would be forced to teach that.
Yeah, I'm less skeptical of you. I think what happens is, this is my point of view, is that this is blue sky thinking. Anybody, any group out there has been asked to put forward their ideas. And what the media does is they latch on to the craziest, most outlandish ideas. We're going to have Stormzy and you're not going to learn Shakespeare. And the media grab onto it. Now, you're right to be worried, but I think this actually, looking at it, I was like, a lot of good stuff saying, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah. This isn't what's going to happen. And I think we have to be careful of what it, like, you could put forward any view. Of course, the media is going to grab onto the maddest, like, most controversial views because that's what sells. That
the maddest view should not come from the maddest view should not come from the person who's chairing it in the first place. Calling setting, for example, symbolic violence is a joke. Okay, it's a joke. Why did those words even come out of her mouth? And
sorry,
if they came out of her mouth, why is
Can
she?
you say that again? Because I didn't catch it.
She called setting of any type symbolic violence. She literally has written that.
When did she say that? In the report?
No. She's written previously.
She has done previously.
Yeah. I think we need to know
one
the
thing
context
you'll find, Carl, is that we do set, for most phonics schemes, we do set. It is not symbolic violence. That's a joke. That is a joke.
No, I think you need to know the context of that. I don't know the context in which that was said, and plucking a statement out like that and throwing it to besmirch what is a widely respected person in education research on both sides of the house is I think a bit much. I think we need to be much fairer than that. She hasn't. She well, you say she said that, but I don't know the context in which she said it, or in fact, if she said it, because you've not cited any source or time. I would urge our listeners to disregard that remark.
No, they can't disregard it because it's the
you
truth.
You can't just make comments about what people may not.
No, you're not doing it. You're not you can't just go that we can't have that. It's widely been cited in various newspapers, various sources.
By who?
Being there in the first place.
Widely been cited by who?
What by sources, because that was part of the criticism.
Sources?
Like, what do you mean? If you want me to put an article in, I can put an article in. But right now, that's not what we're doing. We're talking in general.
I do actually, because you're making the comments, but then have no sources to back them up, Tejinder, and that's not.
That's just not true. Fine. I'll put Bridget. I'll put her in.
Just by saying something isn't true doesn't make it not true. You've got to have evidence. Logical argument means you've got to have evidence, and you've got no evidence. It's like the comment that you made about it's well known that Labour governments dumb down. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. You give me one shred of evidence from anything that's the case. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. That's an outrageously political statement to make.
I'm literally going to send you the paper where Becky Francis and her team wrote that it was symbolic violence. And this is from somebody who actually, so the symbolic violence of setting, a Bordeauxian analysis and mixed methods data on secondary students about setting, right? So that is literally, and she is on there. There we go. This comes from their source.
I'm going to jump in here and say, I'm going to say, obviously we can't disregard something that Tejinder said, but
there you go. Literally, you can click on that and you can see that it literally calls it symbolic violence. It's a joke.
Yes,
because you cannot say that teachers who were doing this. So we're talking about people being out of touch. That's so out of touch. Now, I'm not saying that her work at the EEF was bad. I'm not disagreeing with that whatsoever. What I am saying is that she clearly holds views that are concerning. And the question is, are those views going to then become content in the curriculum? And you say no.
She holds views to gender. Everybody holds views. Dave said that exactly so. It doesn't have any views. I mean, she's paid to have views, but the views are based on research, and the views are based on a careful consideration of the arguments for and against. They're not just wildly asserted plucked out of the air.
I sort of go in between. I do see
weirdness. So, like, what symbolic violence of setting? Are you joking, right? How can you say that you're in touch with reality and say?
Sorry,
that?
Dave. Dave, you were going to say.
Wasn't that comment Tajinder made quite a long time ago? And I do think, like all of us have made comments that maybe we've moved on from. I do think that I know the publication you're talking about, because I do think it's there. There's no doubt about it. It is true, Carl, that there's things in that I would disagree with as well. I'm not going to say what they are because I can't remember the quotes off the top of my head. But I do think the newspapers have slightly cherry-picked it. It's from an article that's, nearly 15, almost 20 years ago now. Sorry, a book, isn't it? And I've seen no evidence that has actually affected any of this in the proposed curriculum changes. I'm not disputing what you're saying because it's the fact, but I just haven't seen any evidence yet to say something that was written by her that I would disagree with as well. I don't have a disagree with you in that sense. That was written quite a long time ago should be used against her to say you're not qualified to do this. If I could see evidence that was having a role in the curriculum changes, I would agree with you, but that's where I disagree.
No, that's fair enough. And I do think that's a fair enough comment. But right now, I'm not going to sit here and I'm more than happy to go, yes, what they've done so far seems really sensible. But I do still think the proof is in the pudding. And I'm not going to be happy until I see what the actual reality is of what they're going to ask us. Until then, I'm not going to be there like going, oh, yeah, this is the most amazing thing. It's like, no, good. Like what you've done so far seems like a sensible course of action. It seems like a sensible course of action. But let's actually look at what you're actually going to ask us to do, because there are things and there are issues still that need to be raised in terms of even what the previous Conservative government did. That, like, there's plenty of things that could be critiqued and should be critiqued. Like, for example, I know a parent who was taking like an actual, who's actually going through wants a judicial review of some of the RSE curriculum. And I think fair enough, actually, because I think too much was pushed through without parents, without proper consultation of teachers and parents. I think and too many external agencies were involved, which didn't actually involve like you're talking about experts, Carl. Well, I don't think enough experts from the actual system itself and the key stakeholders were involved. So fair enough. There are things that could change and that need to change. And I'm not saying the Conservatives were great on that, because I don't think they were. I think they allowed too many external people in as well. As in, anybody could pretty much go and lobby the DFE as much as like a teacher or a leader could. And that's not correct. I'm sorry, third party commercial interests should not have the same standing as we do, right? It just shouldn't be the case.
Can we move on to some of the content of the report, Dave? Because I think there are some interesting points that we need to address, rather than spending all our time talking about, potential, sort of issues with the individual that's written it. The EBAC comments, I think, are worthy of some thought. And I'm interested in your view as a post-16 teacher on this one. EBAC has most definitely had an influence on choices for students at 11 to 16 level, principally because schools know that if they, or they've known in the past, that if they don't have a sufficient number of students entered for the English baccalaureate subjects, they may potentially be brought down or brought to account for that, either by Ofsted or otherwise. So, because it's a stated performance measure in the league tables. A lot of criticism is levelled against that, and certainly all the unions, sorry to mention the unions, Tajinder, but all the unions have said that they don't feel that the EBAC targets as they're currently constituted are at all appropriate for the majority of schools and young people. What's your thought on that?
It's a difficult one. I mean, I think obviously, friends of mine who are in the RE curriculum field are very happy with the report, because it says, it gives a bigger place to RE. It does talk about potentially moving towards a national curriculum for RE, which some of you might know is wrought with difficulty, to put it mildly. I do have some issues. I always thought the EBAC was an attempt to IBIs, is that the right word, the GCSE, without actually going to an IB and trying to come up with a sort of a halfway house that was good for some subjects. But my understanding as well with the EBAC is foreign languages are supposed to be part of it, isn't it? Like the MFL. And there's
Yeah.
no evidence that that has worked. I mean, MFL is dying for a variety of reasons. And I got to say, I was hopeful of the EBAC. To me, it sounded like something that should work. I was broadly in favor, but I've seen no evidence of the impact on A-level. It certainly isn't happening, helping numbers at MFL. What was the target for how many students were going to do modern foreign languages? I mean, we haven't even got close. I guess that's one thing I'm a bit disappointed in the report. It says nothing about that, but that's a personal view. I would have liked to see a bit more about modern foreign languages.
Yeah, I think what it's saying is, in practice, they're acknowledging that the EBAC hasn't worked in the way that it was designed to work. It's deeply unpopular in the profession.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is a lot of schools with modern foreign languages end up saying, look, you've got to study a language, when for some students that's definitely not what they want to do, and that results in them disengaging completely, and then that results in other problems, potentially even behavior problems in schools. So a lot of schools have found that history and geography, that part of the EBAC, that's been pretty much okay, but the languages part has been much more problematic. I think the reason behind that is not anything really intrinsic about languages, although there is a long-standing cultural ill disposition towards learning languages in the UK for all sorts of reasons, which are not good for our economy. But I think the issue is that there is lots and lots of research that backs up the point over many years that languages are statistically the most difficult of all GCSEs, and consequently they just need to be made a bit more accessible. And that was acknowledged. That was acknowledged by Ofqual 2 or 3 years ago, but because of other factors to do with the pandemic and adjustments to the way that exams were assessed during that period, there were meant to be some adjustments to the MFL marking, but it's been a bit of a peripheral thing. It's not had quite. It's
also the quality of teaching, but you could say that if we can't recruit, we're back to that sort of elephant in the room. If you can't recruit the right amount of teachers who are experts in their subject area, all of this is, it's great sort of dreams, but that's the other big concern. The other thing, Tajinder, is what are your feelings on SAT staying? Are you broadly in agreement? I think that's more sort of in your expertise. I noticed they said definitely not going. Absolutely, SATs are here to stay. Basically, get used to it. That seems to be very, very clear. You happy? Unhappy?
I think there needs to be some accountability measure. The thing that makes me unhappy at the moment, though, is because I think they broadly just said that what's already there is already going to stay, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem from the screening check or the multiplication check. I think they're spaced out enough. My beef actually is more that they said they were going to get rid of Key Stage 1 SATs, and yet they still keep publishing it. Stop doing it then. Right, stop doing it. Stop insisting. Because if you said to the sector that we are not going to do this test anymore, then we don't do the test anymore, right? What you don't do is keep publishing it and basically making people do it anyway, right? Like, to me, that's not good enough. If you want to have tests or certain accountability measures, that doesn't bother me whatsoever. And it doesn't, and I don't think that children should be allowed to leave primary school without us knowing what they achieved throughout that time, right? I do think, however, there are some key issues with the reading in particular, because given everything that we know about the knowledge base, about the importance of vocabulary, etc., the fact that the STA is still setting a test based on some sort of generic notion of what children have learned and not learned is a joke. I think it needs to go back to, this is the content of the curriculum. Let's use that as the basis of whatever it is that you're going to ask the children to do. If we won't set text, fine, don't set text. That would be my ideal, set text, right? At least have some that the children can then so then they can answer questions based on it. So at least it's got something to do with you as a teacher. Because right now you're asking schools to be responsible for children reading both in school and out of school, and I don't think that that's fair.
Sorry, Carl, I'm just going to jump onto this one because I feel very strongly about this in a negative way. So I sort of think, I was looking through it and I was thinking, actually, there's a lot I agree with. The bit that really goes against my philosophy of education is point 6, knowledge-rich commitment, but curriculum must keep pace. Polling suggests young people want a greater focus on applied knowledge and skills that will equip them for later life and work. Those are the sort of words that just fill me with absolute dread. am so much against it. What is wrong with learning history or learning English or learning French for knowledge's sake? Because it sets you up well. It's something worthwhile in itself. They say they want to like, oh, there's too much in the curriculum, but we want to add. I mean, society is rapidly changing, bringing new opportunities. So we should consider whether there's sufficient coverage of skills and how we can embed these in history. Oh, not history, sorry. I teach history. Embed these in the already like the subjects. And I just cannot stand that. I absolutely, and I think it sort of almost comes back to what Tajinder said. What are these skills? What do they mean? The knowledge, the 21st century skills. What are we meant to be doing here? And I absolutely hate it. It defies everything I think is good about education in terms of what it's.
The reason why, Dave, that's in there is because currently about a third of young people in 11th to 16th education end up effectively failing their subjects. So when you get to about 13 or 14 as a young person, there is a point at which they then start to decide what they want to learn and what they don't. And you can put them in a room, you can take the horse to water, as it were, but you certainly can't make it drink. And it doesn't matter how brilliant a teacher you are or what wonderful things you do, you will not be able to force some young people to learn things that they regard now as being utterly irrelevant to their current lives. Now, that's not to say there aren't a proportion who don't think like that. There are. And I would say that if you were to take it on a national level, and this is a very, very sort of vague sort of statement in a way, but I think about approximately 40%, maybe 50% of young people are, quite engaged or more than quite engaged in their academic studies at the age of 14 and 15. Probably another 20 to 30% are engaged up to a degree. But then there are clearly another 30% who are very disengaged. And I'm old enough to have worked in the sector at a time when there were vocational options for young people, for those who particularly preferred to study things that were more practical and hands-on for them. And it did work. And the country desperately needs it, Dave, because there is a skill shortage in this country. And if the economy is going to prosper and thrive, it's got to have skilled people. It's got to have people who are well qualified in things that are not just academic, but also in things that are more, training oriented. There's a mix that's got to blend. And I think that what people are saying and have been saying in secondary schools now for really about the last 10 years is that we've gone to a situation where there aren't enough vocational options, training options for those young people that would prefer to go down that route at the age of 14, when frankly they want to, they can do, they would feel validated by doing so and successful, and that would be better for the economy, society, and for the other young people who aren't going down that route.
I want to come back to that because there's some things I think we're cross-talking about what the concern. I totally agree, but I don't think that's my concern. What were you going to say, Tajinder?
No, I to some extent I agree, but I think my problem is that I feel that we never get vocational education right because we don't seem to actually be behind it. Okay, so I don't have a problem with what Carl's saying, that some people do want to take a different path, and that's I think that's fair. At some point in secondary, that's going to happen. I agree with that. I don't agree with it in primary because I think we're just teaching the absolute basics of what we're doing, and I think everybody does need to have that. I don't think we should be making decisions at 5. Sorry, I disagree with that completely about what someone will do for the rest of their lives. However, the way to make vocational education better is not to make academic education worse. Right.
Yes.
So this is my beef is only this, that it seems to be the answer to making vocational or the answer to these children seems to be, let's dumb down the exams for the children who are academic, or let's reduce content, or let's make make it more recent and up to date. I mean,
The
you
false
can't
dichotomy.
you can't badge your way through a situation, right? Like say something like history, for example. Necessarily, we don't teach recent history much or as much because it takes time for us to know what really was relevant, what really did have an impact. You see what I mean? In the immediacy, you can argue, oh well, this particular thing should have been on there. So like my go-to is the Colston statue, right? Like the number of people that came out with it after his statue was toppled. Oh, we should have had it on the curriculum all along. It's like, well, no, because for a start, most of us don't live in Bristol. It wasn't relevant to the vast majority of us. Yes, it was a news story, it happened, but actually, I would still say that it wasn't something that we should put on the history curriculum because it's not relevant enough.
No,
so we
I
can't learn about this, right, on various things and say, well, this needs to come up, this needs to be put on this. Like, sorry, no, that's not how it works.
No, I sort of have 2 points on that. I think I agree with what Carl's saying about the vocational, but that's like vocational education in this country is a massive problem. It needs a complete reworking in terms of value, in terms of the system, but it's a difficult one. Coming from Australia where vocational education is extremely valued, but Australia is a production place. You can get jobs in the mines and in the mills. It's a place that produces an incredible amount and there's loads more opportunities. And it's very hard to sort of be, what would you say, elitist about vocational education in a place like Australia, where likely they're going to earn more money than I could ever dream of. But you would need a massive reform. And also, I do think, where are the apprenticeships in England? We're a service-based economy. I always hear this stuff, but I'm like, but we're not like Germany and we're not like Australia. So it makes it incredibly difficult. But what I'm talking about, Carl, is more what Tajinder's saying. What I worry is this, when you do history, somehow, you'll have to include aspects of citizenship in the modern world. And we should have, I don't know, a lesson on how you should financial aspects, all the things. Oh, kids aren't getting this. I just worry more and more that we're being outserviced to do things that usually would have been the purvey of parents. And we can get into a societal thing on that. But I'm like, you lose and you dilute the beauty of history. And I'm so against this idea that, the reason students aren't coming to school, the reason they don't like it is because it's not relevant to their lives. There's a beauty in the subject.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Dave, on that. I think that will be a hopelessly simplistic view, and I don't think there'd be any serious suggestion that will be correct, frankly. But what I do think is you've got a good point. Obviously, yes, the subject in itself should be liked and studied for its own right and its own benefits. And we focused on history because obviously history happens to be a subject that both of us teach, but in practice, there are lots and lots of other subjects with similar debates about that. And I don't think we're disagreeing necessarily. I think we need to be a little bit careful in that some of the statements that are made in a very broad way, and you can take them to their exaggerated point. You can take the logic further and say, well, that means, it's all got to be relevant. And so I don't think that's what the report's saying. I think they're just making some more balanced, nuanced points, may I argue, about where the curriculum is relevant to certain young people in certain contexts. And I think that's a bit more of a nuance, mate. And I wouldn't suggest for a moment, Tarjinder, that anybody should be choosing what curriculum they follow at the age of 5. I think about 14 is generally the age when it starts to become more likely that young people have, well, they do. They start to decide what they don't like before they start to decide what they do. And I think at that point, it serves nobody's interests to just continually bash away at something that is increasingly, not something they want to do or feel any relevance to doing. So it's just about getting the balance right. And throughout my career, there has been this topic. It's gone to and from. But it's just getting the balance right. And we are a service economy, Dave, but don't forget that a lot of those services require people who are skilled in a number of areas that aren't manufacturing, but they are nevertheless needing skills that go beyond the purely academic curriculum. So I think, whether it's in health and social care, for example, or public services, or in computing, a number of different areas. So, you know, what we mustn't do is stereotype too much what is academic and what is vocational, because to a degree that can become part of the problem in its own right, I think.
So we're almost out of time. So sort of final thoughts. Mine is, I think we do need to move away from this idea. I do agree, Tajin, that I don't think that opportunities for all means providing an easier exam, but I do think we need to move away from the idea that less content and less exams is dumbing down. I think it can be done in a way that's better. I've seen it done in other countries. That doesn't mean dumbing down. That's my final comment. Tajinder?
Well, like I said, proof of the pudding.
Carl?
I agree, Dave, and I think the proof of the pudding is already there. As you said, internationally that's
Not
the case,
Carl,
and internationally that's the case, and therefore I think we should follow the pudding.
Okay, great to end on a bit of debate as well. Fantastic. Thanks so much for being with us today, and catch everything on TTR over the next week or so. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.